Good morning. Thank you everybody for coming. This is Dr. Dowling. I'm Dr. Douglas Jackson, and we're here to present to you, as they said, on engaging children with challenging behaviors. First off, we'd like to review our learning objectives. So today we want to describe a variety of evidence-based practices that can minimize challenging behaviors. Secondly, we'd like to identify interventionist role in eliciting, managing, as well as mediating those challenging behaviors. And we'd also like to plan targeted interventions for addressing challenging behaviors. So everything we discussed today will give you a moment to try and integrate that and apply it to your appropriate settings. So here is Dr. Dowling's disclosure. She's employed here at the university. She has no other financial gains or interests that may impact the information we're presenting here today. And for myself, I'm employed here at UM as well. I do sit on some committees with the American Occupational Therapy Association, for which I'm not paid, and they're not impacting any information that we're disseminating here today as well. So first off, we want to give you an introduction. So what we have here is that it's all about you. We're here to give you some strategies, but above all, what's most important in addressing challenging behaviors is you. You have a big role in setting the stage, in mediating the environment, helping this child be successful in whatever context they're expected to operate in. And what's contingent on that is your particular knowledge, the skill set that you actually bring to that, as well as your behavior, how it is that you're responding in these situations, as well as how you're modeling the appropriate behaviors you'd like to see for the caregivers and others involved in that child's life, and basically how you are interacting with that child when they're exhibiting these behaviors. So as we want to point out and stress, it's all about you. So even though we have all these strategies that we're going to review, you need to consider your role in all of this when considering the child you might be working with who's exhibiting these behaviors and how you impact their actual behavior.
Let's start with a little dose of reality. Let's meet Billy. Billy is 8 years old, and Billy has persistent behavioral challenges. He is forever whining, complaining, lying on the floor. Doesn't matter whether he's at home, at school, or in therapy. You get a little dose of Billy right here, okay? Whether he is given a schedule with structure or choice of activity, he yells no at everybody, complains he is not doing anything. And recently he has started hissing and spitting at people. So his therapist and his teacher and his mother are feeling very, very helpless. They just do not know what to do in the face of this behavior. Some of you may know someone just like Billy, or he may remind you of other people that you know. Children with and without developmental or neurodevelopmental disabilities learn to maneuver in their environments. That's to survive and to thrive, to get the things they want and to avoid the things they don't like. If you provide this child with social attention, what is everybody thinking? Okay, what do you want? You can't do this now. Or you provide them with emotional attention. What's wrong? Why are you crying? Giving them hugs, pats on the back, and I'm stopping there because I've seen way more things. Mothers who will start breastfeeding 3-year-olds, and I'm like, whoa. They just threw a block at me, and now, wait a minute. Or negative behavior. Don't do that. Stop that. Most likely, you are reinforcing that behavior, and it is going to reoccur. Now, just take a second. I'm sure you're all thinking, oh my God, if he was my patient, what would I be doing? But how many of you, and it's just a show of hands, if I told you what his diagnosis, let's say I said this child has an intellectual disability, how many of you would change what you were doing? Okay. What if I said he had autism? What if I said he had Fragile X syndrome, CP, ADHD? Would you in fact change what you were doing? Okay? And this, we'll come back to this question. We're going to come back to Billy. But the important thing is that emotional and behavioral problems are not diagnostic of any of those disorders I just mentioned. However, they are much more common in children who have developmental disabilities. And that's really across the lifespan. So the kids we're talking about are not just the babies, not just the toddlers, not just the preschoolers. It really doesn't matter. I have had kids throw blocks at me who were toddlers, but I've also had young adults try to throw chairs and tables at me. Okay? So it really doesn't matter. The behaviors, the methods, and the things are the same. How we go approach it about it may differ. Co-occurring behavioral and psychiatric problems affect 4 times the number of children or individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities than their typically developing peers. So these are a few statistics. You don't have to remember these. Okay? I'll give you a few examples. Approximately 88% of children having both autism and intellectual disability will demonstrate clinically significant levels of hyperactivity and impulsivity. Almost all of them, in other words. Okay. Another one is that the prevalence of aggressive behavior in children diagnosed with autism is associated with a co-occurring diagnosis of intellectual disability. So the kids we're talking about here are really the complex types of children. The presence of these challenging behaviors impacts the nature and the intensity of the supports that these children need to participate in their daily activities. Many families of children with neurodevelopmental disorders have difficulty accessing care for their children. And one of the reasons is, this is what's emerging in the literature, is that this may be related to the lack of sufficiently trained professionals. And this is not just mental health professionals, but allied professionals, medical professionals. There was a survey of, these are 2 surveys I pulled up. One was a survey of medical students, and another survey looked at graduates of counseling and clinical psychology training programs. And what these surveys found, that their level of training was inadequate for them to be able to manage challenging behaviors. So this workshop really represents an attempt to remedy some of those problems, working on how you can provide those individualized supports. Okay, there's tremendous need for therapists, teachers, counselors, and medical professionals to be able to provide evidence-based interventions to address challenging behavior as it arises. Not giving a referral, saying, oh, you need to go to ABA. No, as it happens, as it arises in your office, in your center, in your classroom, wherever you happen to be working, to support children and consequently improve their well-being and mental health. The other, I didn't mention on the previous slide, but last month, the APA has a Spotlight on Disability newsletter, which I, just because of my interest group, I received this newsletter. And last month, the entire issue was on mental health issues in intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder. So this is, this conference was so topical in the sense this is being discussed really on a national level, not just on a local level. So as an interventionist, your goal is to minimize the impact of challenging behavior on the child's performance and participation. It's also impacting your ability to do your job, okay? Do what you want to do. It's important that you understand the child and that you model some of these skills for the parent. So in other words, if I'm working with a child and I have something's going on in the in my little room, I immediately start intervening, asking questions, modeling things. I don't want the parent to feel bad in that session that, oh my God, my kid just attacked that person, you know. I don't want them apologizing. I want them to leave that feeling hopeful that there's lots of things that we can do together to manage this child's behavior. Okay, I'm going to skip this. We'll come back to this. Okay? Years of research have produced evidence for effective strategies. Doesn't matter whether we go to the Department of Education, they have the What's Works brief. The Council for Exceptional Childhood and the Division of Learning Disabilities also puts out a what works. They code things green for go, yellow for caution, and red for don't do. I'm not going to cover things that we don't do. What is up here on the screen is based on, basically summarized from those 2 articles that are up there, and there will be in the reference section so you can look at them. But where this comes from is back in 2006, the U.S. Department of Education funded the National Professional Development Center on Autism. Okay, this was a collaboration between the Frank Porter Graham Institute at the University of North Carolina, the Weissman Center at the University of Wisconsin, and the Mind Institute at UC Davis. They have spent years examining, looking at the research evidence. They use rigorous methodology, and they've published several reviews. This is the most current statement, or what you want to call. They have identified 27 distinct evidence-based practices that have been shown to be helpful in addressing the learning and development. This is of children on the spectrum. But it really doesn't matter. Just like I said, the Department of Ed, if we take any one of these things, we're going to see overlap. I've just chosen this because it had some nice slides. But anyway, we're going to use this as a model. But a therapist is going to look at this list. Okay, 27 distinct practices. Do I have to use all of them? I mean, which one do I choose? How do I start? Which one do I use for this child? Which one do I use for this particular problem? The selection of practices is based on the identification of the practice, meaning what works for what. Okay. And if there are if you were to go into these documents, there are huge spreadsheets that show the practice. They show which ages it's relevant for, what it's effective for. But we're going to unpack it in a somewhat different method in a minute. So the selection of which practice to use is based on identification of what works and your professional judgment and experience. Coming back to the you. Let's go back to that slide. Okay, I'm sure everyone has seen this pyramid before. Okay, this is a model. It's a public health model for promotion, intervention, all kinds of things. And if you should be able to read, but at the very top of the pyramid, it says intensive intervention and targeted social emotional supports. That's what we're here about today. Okay? But this has to be combined with other things. It has to be combined with attention to program quality, targeted professional development, and the intervention's judgment and practice, meaning how much experience they've had with these kinds of things. You need to have a solid foundation on which to base your intervention. Okay? You need to recognize that a top-down approach, if we only start at the top, those intensive interventions, that approach, I'm not saying it won't work, but it's not the most effective utilization of these strategies. So with that caveat, we're going to go back to these 27 practices, and we're going to start what I call unpacking them. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group them conceptually into related areas, because how do these hang together? What do they do? And I will also highlight those that in fact have evidence for impacting behavior. Because I said there are 27 practices. Not all of them are relevant for addressing challenging behavior. So ABA is not just for ABA therapists. Okay? It's for all of us. And ABA is not just one practice. Okay? These 5 practices really reflect the basic principles of ABA. They can be used by anybody, occupational therapist, speech and language pathologist, a paraprofessional, a parent, anyone. Okay? They are the building blocks. You'll see that 3 of them are starred. Those are the 3 that are relevant for addressing challenging behavior. The point here is that you need to make sure that what you are reinforcing is the desired behavior, because whatever is reinforced will persist. Okay? Sometimes you need to assist the child to engage in the desired behavior by providing a prompt. The child engages in the behavior, you can reinforce it. The problem with children who have neurodevelopmental disabilities is that they become dependent on those prompts. I mean, I could give you examples for each one of these, but I'd rather cover these and save the examples for later. But these children tend to become dependent on those prompts to exhibit the behaviors. So if they are dependent on those prompts, they are not independent yet. They have not mastered this particular skill. Time delay is a method for withholding the reinforcement for a short period of time until the child, in fact, independently demonstrates that. So you want to basically fade out your prompting. And I do like the cartoon with Dennis the Menace. Wouldn't it be easier just to tell me what I can do rather than going through all these things? Okay. Now, positive behavior supports. Everyone has heard about positive behavior supports. There are school-wide positive behavior supports. There are class-wide positive behavior supports. I mean, it goes into basically into every report I write. But it's like we all get sort of this sort of glassed-eyed, okay, positive behavior, yeah. But maybe we don't all mean the same sorts of things. Okay, when a problem behavior occurs, the most usual initial step is to try to determine the cause of that behavior by closely examining what happens before and after. Okay, that's our functional behavioral analysis. It may be a trigger, such as too much noise or something like that. And the therapist may decide that she's going to use antecedent-based intervention in which she removes the trigger, perhaps changing the location. Okay, I'm giving you just simple ideas. Or she may determine that when she attends to the child, what she says, could be stop it, or anything else, or what she does may in fact be motivating that child to persist in the behavior. Okay? So she may decide that she will use extinction or ignoring the behavior. Ignoring really works. I use it all the time. But we often don't have the luxury of time to wait it out. And sometimes a small behavior can escalate into a much greater problem. Okay? So in those cases, we will use redirection or substitution, where the idea is we want to interrupt the behavioral chain. Again, these are highly jargonistic words, so again, don't worry, we'll get to the more fun part. But you need to know where these things come from. Okay, so when we've now redirected the child, we can now reinforce a different behavior, substituted behavior, what I call DRO. We're reinforcing other behaviors. And if you see that the child seems to be, the source of the challenging behavior appears to be related in frustration, the rule of thumb here is to always provide communication-based training. Because usually if we can provide them some alternative, they can express their frustration in a more appropriate. So therefore, I would give a picture as opposed, the child may use pictures rather than crying. The idea is always working on some other behaviors. Now, the loveliness of positive behavior supports is really, the importance here does not lie in identifying the function, because I can tell you that the function of a child's behavior is either going to be to get something or to avoid something. We know that. So don't waste your time. Move on. Okay? The usefulness of positive behavior supports really lies in identifying and defining the challenging behavior. What exactly is the child doing? He's not being bad. I need to know, parents come in, oh, no, you need to tell me exactly what he does. Okay? And it's in that defining the challenging behavior is the first important thing. The next thing why positive behavior supports are so useful is identifying and defining the strategies to prevent the challenging behavior. Also identifying and defining alternative behaviors to reinforce, and identifying and defining consequences that will not maintain the behavior. Those four things are really, really important. Okay? I'll repeat them again. Identify and define the challenging behavior. We need to know exactly what we're working with. Okay? Identify and define strategies to prevent the behavior from occurring. Identifying and defining alternative behaviors to reinforce, and identifying consequences that will not reinforce the behavior. Because usually if you go to those 4 things, you're gonna find all kinds of very interesting things are going on, and you will have lots to work with. Because often, possibly, I don't know where to start. Well, start with defining the behavior. Okay, so your few basic rules of thumb. Okay. A core feature of challenging behaviors is often difficulties with social communication. Okay, more likely than not. Okay, so it's a good guess that you're going to be working on directly teaching social skills. Again, it has a little asterisk. It does work. Okay, so social skills training can be done in any number of ways, but really when you're talking about social skills training, we're really talking about interacting with other people. So it can be in small groups. It's best done in the setting where it occurs. And it can be done in lots of, it doesn't have to be a psychologist. It could be a teacher. It could be getting a teenage buddy. There are programs like a social mentor called Best Buddies. There are all kinds of different options out there. Social narratives is another approach. Okay? This is in which the therapist, I'm going to use the therapist just to refer to all of us, basically writes a brief story that describes the expected behavior. Now you can write it yourself. These are commercially available. You can modify things, and as we go through more specific examples, we'll be showing you things. Those social narratives can be modified all the way up to actually using pictures of the child's actual environment, the settings in which you want things to occur, to include pictures of the child, or using the child's favorite character. I've written many social stories about Scooby-Doo, okay, because that was somebody, whatever the child likes to watch on television, I will use whatever to write that story. Okay. But some people don't like to write stories. There's plenty of books and things that are available out there. So don't worry, you don't actually have to do that. Effective teaching strategies. While these are all effective for teaching children with neurodevelopmental disorders, there are only 2 of them on this list that are effective for changing behavior. Okay? Because many children with neurodevelopmental disorders have difficulties processing language. Visual supports are like, this should be underlined, bolded, in flashing lights when the slide, I just couldn't figure out how to do it on the slide. Okay? But the idea is it doesn't matter whether they have trouble understanding language, whether they have trouble producing language, whether they have difficulty using language to create associations, they have difficulty sequencing language, remembering language, memory, any of the above. So I basically have covered intellectual disability, expressive receptive language disorder, autism, learning disorder, any number of those kids, even children with ADHD have trouble generally with working memory. So all of these things, visual supports will work for all of these children. Interestingly, there's been a lot of evidence or a lot of emphasis on using discrete trial learning. Okay, this is in fact, and right now I'm assuming that you know what discrete trial, that we're talking about one-on-one, stimulus response, prompts as needed, reinforcement, error correction, immediate error correction. Discrete trial is great for teaching information. It does nothing for behavior. So when you make that referral for ABA therapy, make sure it's not discrete trial learning, because it's not going to do anything for behavior. The other one on the very bottom of the list, but not the least, there is increasing evidence to support the efficacy for exercise. And this is aerobic exercise movement. Okay? There's a lot of evidence that this improves attention and behavior. So this means you are not going to be pulling the child off the playground to do his little therapy session. He needs that time on the playground. Okay. There is a whole range of interventions. It's actually quite broad when we're talking about technology-oriented interventions. This could include computer-assisted formats, speech-generating devices, and apps for smartphones and tablets. Okay. I love them. Both Doug and I love all of these things. We use them extensively. There's a couple other warnings here, though. They can be distracting, and the ease of which you use them, the kid then takes them and they're busy doing other things. So you need to know how to use guided access and how to make sure that this does not become a distraction. I've tried using some of these things on devices with children with attention problems. And believe me, I was like, I couldn't believe, I thought they were going to break the tablet. They're hanging upside down, pressing all the buttons. Okay, into the microphone.
Oh, you did? Okay, thank you. Sorry. Sorry.
Okay. So they're useful, but you need to, they're nothing is a perfect solution. Video modeling is basically a tech-based approach to producing those social narratives. Again, those are commercially available, or you can make them. Again, how you're going to use those, I use them primarily with older, more able students. I will actually take videos of kids in the actual setting and use those as teaching devices. But there's a lot of, again, lots of variability in how you use those things. Okay. Now, all of those things, how do we actually use those things? Okay, so now we're going to the how-to. This is the more interesting part. Our goal is to reduce the probability or the frequency of occurrence, as well as the severity of the behavior problems. And we can do that. Rather than trying to remember those 27 things, we've grouped them into 6 easily remembered tips. The Goldilocks rule. Choices, choices, choices. Sooner than later. Catch them being good.
Wow.
That's about technology. Just
It was reinforcing it, caught you being good.
anytime, any place, and less is more. Now, isn't that much easier to remember than those pages, 27 items back there? Do you really want me to go over antecedent-based and extinction ignoring and DRO again? Or would you rather remember some of these things? Okay. As we go through these tips, we'll be showing you tools. And then what I want to mention is that anything that we show you will be available. You can look at the break, or I will be putting them in the FAST lab here in this building, so you can come to the lab and you can actually check out some of these things. Okay? I can't reproduce them because most of them are copyrighted or single-use license, so I can't copy them, but you get to see them. Okay. My most favorite, okay, I had to twist Douglene's arm to let me do this one. The Goldilocks rule. Not too big, not too small, not too loud, not too bright, not too fast, not too slow, not too hard, but just right. Okay? What we're really talking about here are antecedent and setting events. Okay? This is really where I start when I think about what I'm going to be doing and where I'm going to be doing. I'm talking about the physical structure, the arrangement in my room. How I arrange my space is different for an older child or a younger child. I make sure the tables and chairs are the right size. I create routines. Okay? I also will have social narratives if I need them. Okay? I've created a social narrative for what happens when the child comes to clinic for the adolescents. Okay? Because many of the adolescents that I see have significant problems. So coming to clinic can be a challenge. These are all things that you do before. Okay? I have toys on the table. Where do I put the parent? I have the parent typically seated behind the child, accessible but not in the way. Okay? The other rule here is we don't want them hungry, tired, hot, cold, sick, or otherwise. Do not battle biology. You will lose. Guaranteed. Okay? That means that you have to be very flexible in how you approach these things. Okay? And you use the information you have about the child, and you're constantly learning new information. And you must be incorporating this information as you go. I recently saw a young child, between the ages of 2 and 3. I will tell you the diagnosis. The child had Fragile X syndrome, and he was referred for probable autism because, in fact, he did a lot of things like throwing things. So I have the child in the room, and I noticed that although he's between 2 and 3, he walks like he's 12 months old. He doesn't have language. So his language and movement patterns are really much of a much younger child. I take out the toys that I have, because I didn't know that much about him. I'm learning as I go. And I have a nice set of blocks. Well, he starts drawing the blocks. These are large blocks. We are now dodging the large blocks. So the blocks have to be removed. The blocks go to timeout, not the child. What happened was, as I'm learning, this child is really not functioning at the level to be able to do the puzzle with the blocks. So I substituted soft things. It was much safer for all of us. And we went back down to very simple games. We rolled a soft ball back and forth. We rolled a car back and forth. I used simple gestures. I had the child imitate my gestures. Basically what I was doing were all the subtests from something called the STAT, the Screening Test for Autism in Toddlers. But I didn't have to have the test in front of me because they're just basic things you do with young kids. So in doing this, I'm showing that this child can actually engage in play-based behaviors despite the referral. But we're at a much younger level. You need to use that information to already change your environment and change what you're doing with the kid. Because this is a kid who literally was throwing hard blocks, running around the room screaming. And I now had him on the floor, rolling toys back and forth. So the fact is, I'm doing what I can to prevent the problems. And the parents are like, oh, I can't believe he's playing with you. But that's because people weren't playing with him using the right tools. And I allowed this child to move around the room. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Darlene.
Alrighty, so next up I'll discuss with you choices. So we already touched on visual supports, but it's one of the biggest strategies that we actually use to help shape our environment so that child is actually successful in whatever task or procedure you want them to participate in. We have a bunch of these on the table. We have a bunch of these in the lab already. But one thing we like to start with is your visual supports for the schedule. So visual supports can include a variety of things. They can be picture-based ideally. They can be object-based. It depends on the skills and understanding of that child as to how you may go about making these devices. So we can have them from low-tech, which are tangibles, paper-based things like this. We can have them high-tech even, all the way down to those that you'll find on a tablet in some of the apps. We'll circulate some of these around the room as we discuss them, but the visual schedule is key. In a classroom setting, you want to have your visuals up as to what the routine for the day may be, as well as in your individual treatment sessions and your procedures. So if you know the child's coming in maybe for an audiology exam, and you know they need to check in, then they need to go on the elevator, then they'll come to your room, you do 3 or 4 different procedures with them. You want to outline that visually so they know what to expect, what is actually coming next. The same thing in a classroom setting. You may come in, have breakfast, move on to circle time, go outside to play. Visually, you need that represented for that child to understand. Now, they may be young and you think, oh, they can't read, they don't know what these are, but with consistency and presenting these things on a routine basis, they'll come to learn what those pictures actually mean if you use them the way that they're intended. Same thing in your treatment sessions. If you know you're going to come in from the waiting room, you might start with a picture of the waiting room and bring that with you. When you get to your room, waiting room's all done, you take that picture away, then what's next? We may sit at the table. Ideally, you want to have some flexibility built in, whereas if that child doesn't want to sit at the table and you know it's not successful every time you bring that child to the table, give them a choice. Maybe we can sit on a beanbag or we can sit in the chair. If you need them in a chair, you can sit in the yellow chair or the blue chair. It's all about choices. Children like to have some choice in that manner. And when we take that away and we have our own expectations of we must do this, that, and the other, you may be the cause of escalating those behaviors. And providing those visuals is going to help with that transition. If they're coming in maybe with a transition object, they came with their favorite car and you need them to put that car away, have something there for them to put it in. Don't get into the habit of taking things away from a child because you may escalate them in doing that. You need an all-done bin sitting by your door as soon as they walk in. It can be clear so the child sees that that toy is still accessible to them, but they need to do some work first and then they can get it back. So that goes back into our first then boards that we have here. First we're going to do some work and then you can get whatever it is that you need. You need to be considering though what that then is. If it's a computer and you know you can't turn that off and get that child away from that, you don't want to make that the option that they get to choose. It needs to be something that you can actually stop, something that they can do for a short, brief period of time, and maybe you get some sense of enjoyment from that, and then it goes back in the all done bin. Choice boards and first then boards don't only have to start with just 2 options. You'll have all these other choices over here. So it's not for you to determine last time he liked playing with the ball. So you use that as your only choice when they get there. No, it's all about choices. So they're very easy to make. You can take a picture of different things in your room. If you want to go high-tech and use an app, you can take pictures of each and every one of them and have them scroll through just the camera reel even. Which one do you want to choose today? So think of that child, think of their interests. Oftentimes when you do the initial assessment or that background check, you can ask the caregiver, what is it that that child likes to do? What is it that turns that child into a compliant person who can sit and engage, especially if you need to interview the parent first? What are they able to do independently that they enjoy? Oftentimes you ask the caregiver to bring that in. And if you don't even want to deal with toys from the outside, you need to have a reinforcement bin available with a variety of options. As Dr. Dowling mentioned, you might not want hard things in there if you know this is the child that likes to throw items. Safety first, so you may need to go towards softer things. Maybe it's just something simple as they're coloring on a piece of paper. Things like that might engage a child, but you don't know until you try. So having a variety of options to give them choices is going to be key. So we have our visual schedules, our first then boards, our choice boards. We also have timers. Timers are a big thing because time is a concept that children don't get. It involves executive functioning and it's not a concrete thing. If you tell me I've got 15 minutes, I don't know what 15 minutes is. I don't know what it feels like internally. I may not be able to tell what a clock says. It might be digital, it might be analog nowadays, or the old school clocks that go around. Children don't know how to read those things, especially a toddler. They don't know what time is. So you need to build things in that help them know that you're not sitting here for an eternity. At some point this task will stop. And you may need to start with a minimal amount of time. Engaging them just for a minute, they're hearing that beep goes off and they learn that, oh, it went off. You pull back out that first then board. Great job. You're finished working. Now you can do whatever it is that they chose as their reinforcer. Up there we have the time timer. The way that one actually operates is as the red disappears, that means time is passing away. So when the red is all gone, the white appears, and that means the task is complete. They have auditory ones that maybe even light up. I'll show that on another screen. They have your old basic kitchen timers, the egg ones that you can spin, they'll beep. They have the digital ones that you could set and just carry around. Dollar Tree carries them, so it's not as though you need to seek out all these expensive options. They're very cheap base ones, and if you have your phone on you, just don't let the child get it. You can actually program the timer that's built into your cell phone. Moving on from visuals, I want to touch on modeling. Modeling, you can use video modeling to do that. They have a lot of prepackaged ones that you can actually access online, or you can create them on your own, but just know that that takes a higher level of cognitive ability in order to benefit from that. Also, just think modeling. A child might not know how to use a first then board, so you can say, first I'm going to sit in the chair and then I'm going to take out all the materials we need. So you can model for that child live in that session what it's going to look like to actually use that first then board, what it actually looks like to use a token system. I did one problem, I did the next problem, now I'm going to do the third problem, now I get to take a break. So in the context of that session, modeling what it looks like, you're showing the caregiver what it looks like, because ideally, we really don't want the caregiver outside of the session, because then you're working with that child in isolation and you're reinforcing that notion that you're there to fix the child. The child is a component of a unit, a family unit, and when you take them out of that, the caregivers don't know what's going on in the context of your sessions. Depending on where you work in your particular setting, that might be difficult at times, especially if you're in a classroom maybe. But that communication is key as to what strategies you're finding to be effective and how it's working for you, and then transitioning that over to the caregiver so it can be used in a variety of settings. Because after a while, you might be able to get that child to comply within your environment, but they need to learn these strategies and apply them outside of being just with you alone. And then moving on to personal narratives, we touched on that briefly, but those go back to social stories. But they want to be more specific to the child. So if you know your child that you're working with might like Thomas the Train, the social story that you might develop may involve Thomas the Train. It may even need to include a picture of that child where they're embedded in the story and just even including their name in it. Reading their name, Johnny comes into the room and he's here to see Miss Susan. We're going to work on whatever it is you're doing for the context of that day. We even have higher level ones for medical procedures even. I'm going to the doctor today. You're going to come to the elevator and go to the 3rd floor. Johnny can press the elevator button to go to number 3. So you're allowing them to see what actually is happening, and sometimes you can email that to the parents beforehand so that they can go over it, because you don't want to use a social story in the moment when the behavior is happening, because that child is not available to learn anything at that moment. They're supposed to be used routinely throughout the day, so if it's in the classroom, from they get there, you might want to review it. If you're picking them up in the lobby, you want to review it then. When you get to your table again, you may want to go over it again. So that child is consistently reinforced as to what those expected behaviors are going to be for whatever procedure or activity that you may want to engage them in. Okay, these are some of the high-tech visual supports that we have available on the iPads here. Up here we have ChoiceWorks, and this is one of the more robust apps. So a lot of the visuals that we just went over, they're actually embedded in this app. It has a timer built in, it has choices built in, it has a visual schedule built in, and it has timers built in. So what you can do is, this one is a night schedule, but you can build one for whatever activity you're doing. As the child completes it, they slide it over to the right. Here they have a timer as to how long it might take. When the timer beeps, it is all done, you shift it to the right, you shift it to the right. And then down here are the reinforcers. What is it that the child chose that they wanted to do? Maybe they wanted to play or engage with a TV or iPad, a car, whatever the reinforcer is. If you have it in your video library or you can pull from the bank that's built in, you can set it as what they're going to get. So if technology isn't a distractor for that child, you can go that route. Otherwise, it's best to stay low-tech because you don't have to have that battle over, I want the iPad, I see the iPad, give me the iPad, and the iPad is not there to play. Over here we have...
ChoiceWorks? I mean, I've brought ChoiceWorks up. I pass it around, or...
Yeah, you can. Or at the break, if you'd like, you can come down and look at it, but we can send them around, yeah. Over here we have First Then, and First Then is just what it says, first this, then that. So you can have anything from 2 items there to several items. And there's different modes. So if a child can go from left to right, you can put it on that mode. If a child can follow a list, you can switch it to the list mode. And what it does is gives you that visual representation of what is expected for the schedule for that task during that day. And then up top we have iReward. iReward actually allows caregivers to get 1 free on their iPad or iPhone, so it's specific to that child. You can also use this to give some accountability for home programs when you're giving them out to families. So even though the child's name is on it, you can have the mom on there as to whether they did the activities with that child, and it tracks the data for you. So it's listed on a daily basis, and they can click the star. It's almost like a token system, so you know whether they did that task or not. All right, moving on, here's some more low-tech devices as to how we can use a token system. So the one on your right here is a token system where maybe that child likes trains. So I put stars in the box where you can already have printed stars out and maybe have Velcro on the back, and as they complete each and every task, you can reward them with a token, and as soon as they're finished with it, they're able to get whatever it is they chose to work for. If you want to allow that child even more choices, you can have stamps there. So maybe they want to use a turtle stamp or a train stamp. If you have that available to you, let the child have some choice in the matter as to what it is they want to use to actually manipulate that, because we want these children to, yes, learn how to use it, but also become independent with it, because as you use it across different settings and then they get older, they can implement these strategies on their own. We're not expecting them to always rely on us. We want them to eventually learn how to be independent in implementing these. The one over here also incorporates what the child is working for, so they can circle what it is that they chose, and then this is actually the schedule of what's going to go on. So as they do all of these, you can check it off. So for that child who doesn't do well with manipulatives and they go missing and the visuals go missing, you may just want to have a dry erase marker there and just circle and check it off. Also, sometimes these Velcro pictures get lost, and maybe he needs to do 3 things and you only have 2. If it's laminated, you can use a dry erase marker, put an X on it, a check, a smiley face, whatever you like. We want to stay low tech because they're easy to reproduce, they're easy to give to caregivers, and they're easy to transport. So if your iPad's not charged, all of your strategies are going out the window. So if you always have low tech as an option, that's the best way to start because ideally it's cost effective and you don't have to worry about the glitches with technology. Alrighty, now we're moving on to self-regulation. So you have that child in your session who you might have pushed a little too hard, he had a rough day, we don't know what things took place before they got to you, and you're in the middle of your session and they have a meltdown. They may even have a meltdown in the waiting room, but you're able to get them upstairs, get them to your treatment room, and what do you do next? Now, as I said, is not the time to pull out the social story to review the desired behaviors as to how they should be in the context of that session. That child may need some means of help to actually calm down. So we have the peace place, which gives you those visuals as to what you may use to self-calm. And it also builds in timeout. A key thing about timeout, though, is you have to realize that timeout isn't something because you're upset at the child, you take them and you put them in timeout, because that's not effective. Timeout is most effective when the child is being removed from something that they actually want to be there for. So it shouldn't be your end-all be-all, Johnny's misbehaving, he's going to timeout. Now, depending on what program and intervention you're using, timeout might be needed. So depending on what your behavior is and other interventions that that child is having, you may want to review that with the caregiver so everybody's on the same page as to how it's used. But ideally, in the context of your session, taking that child and putting them in timeout isn't always the most appropriate thing to do in that moment. So as I said, they may need ways to actually calm down. So there's visuals in the book, and over here it tells you what you need to do. When I need to calm down, I can take a deep breath, I can count to 10, maybe I can stop and think, I can use my words, I can keep my hands and my feet to myself. There's also other methods like the turtle method, how they can almost bundle up like a turtle, and it allows them to shut down and for a desired amount of time, and then they can come back to the activity. But ideally you want to know that that's just for a moment, and that is not the time for you to continue to place demands on that child. They need time to come back to what it is that they were doing, process their emotions, because self-regulation entails, it's a complicated process. It entails them processing the different things in their environment. It entails them processing their thoughts, their emotions, and trying to make it match the situation to what's acceptable in that setting. So ideally, when a child is in disarray like that, your key thing to be focused on is safety. If that child is one who's throwing objects, you may want to have that big plastic white Tupperware, which I always have readily accessible to me. Everything gets dumped in and you might need to push it out. Because you don't want things that are going to cause further harm. If they're that type who likes to fall on the floor and roll and kick, just catch the head. Or get a soft mat if you have that available. Let them have it out on the mat, because you don't want to be in that moment with that child, because then you're socially reinforcing that negative behavior if it was attention that they were wanting, as well as if it was escape that they wanted. You want to make sure that your behavior isn't escalating them or reinforcing that, because the next time they do that and they know you came and, oh, it's okay, and you spend 5 minutes trying to make them feel better, before you know it, the session's over. And they're like, okay, I came in and I just had to act a fool and I get out of everything. Now, the session might only be 30 minutes, so it might have been mild the first time. You realize, like, oh, I threw a toy and I got upset and it was okay because she came and coddled me. Next time, he's going to throw the toy, your iPad, all your materials, and then it turns into a 15-minute battle, and you're still there coddling this child. So you want to remove yourself from the situation and give them more appropriate strategies to actually learn how to calm down. We also have other ones, which is the when I get upset, calm down choice board. It gives them options as to when I get upset, I can, and you need to teach these strategies to the child sometimes. They may not know what this feels like, so when they're not in behavioral disarray, that's when you go over these things. As you're working on social skills, if you have a child who you know that's an issue, okay, we're going to do 5 things today, and I know this particular one is hard for you. When we get to that, if it gets too hard, just let me know, and you can do one of these strategies. So you want to pre-plan that and have options available that may work for the child that are readily accessible in that room. Some settings, they may have a sensory gym, and you take the child out to the sensory gym or a playroom or something like that. That's enforcing escape behavior. You want it something you can do in the moment that's not too disruptive to whatever it is that you need to do in the context of your environment. We also have the Anger ABCs book, and it goes over more self-regulation strategies that the child can actually do. On the iPad, there's zones of regulation. It actually helps you learn how to self-regulate. It has the child cognitively process, in this moment, the child is feeling this. What should they do? So it can be used as a teaching tool to help the child learn how to better process what they should be doing in the moment and different self-regulation tools they can have. There's another one. It's an app called MindShift, and it's for older kids and teens, and it deals with anxiety. It also helps with dealing with intense emotions, social anxiety, performance anxiety, worrying, panicking. So there's a boatload of apps that are out there. So you have low-tech options as well as high-tech options that you can actually use with children to help promote their self-regulation.
Excuse me, what is the name of the app that the last one that you said?
Mind shift.
Mind shift?
Mind shift.
Mind.
Yes, mind.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So next we're going to talk about sooner than later. So what we're getting at there for sooner than later is that you need to embed these strategies to provide a means for the child to effectively communicate with you sooner than later. We're not saying jump straight to AAC or something like that, but they need simple visuals, picture exchange communication if you use that systematically, or just simple pictures where if they can't communicate to you in the moment that they need a break, you have that card on your desk and you let them know that, hey, if you need a break, here's a card. You got 3 of them, so if you give me all 3, you have to shape that so they're not using it as an escape behavior when you're there maybe for 30 minutes and they've used all 3 in the first 3 minutes. So you want to space that out and teach them how to appropriately use that, but give them an option to request a break, especially when they're getting frustrated. And you can even cue them. If you see them getting frustrated, you might want to say, it looks like you might need a break. And you can hand over hand shape that behavior to hand you the break card. And you can give them a break, set the timer so they know that it's not for an eternity, and then they can come back to whatever that activity is. We have here one of the communicators. The hug me picture is on there, but there are many pictures you can put on there. Maybe he needs to take a walk. Maybe he needs to go get a drink of water. Maybe he needs to sit in the beanbag chair for X amount of minutes, and then he can come back. But give them options to communicate. And then we have that timeout card, but it's not timeout as you may think. They're actually requesting to take a break. So there's many different ways that you can phrase it, term it, but you need to teach these behaviors to the children when they're not in behavioral disarray. So take those moments to let them learn what it is that's needed to be done. Let them learn how to effectively use these strategies, because in the moment, if this is the first time they've been shown this, it's going to be hard for them to effectively use it. And then moving on, we want to make sure we catch them being good. So this is where we're talking about a lot of the reinforcement strategies, the ignoring strategies, prompting strategies, and how to best use them. So positive reinforcement. When a child does something that's desired, the behavior is desired, you want to reinforce them. Thank you, good job. And be specific as to what it is that you're actually praising them for. Because hearing good job all the while is not specific enough to let them know what behavior that you're actually reinforcing them for. And what we end up seeing is children who have been exposed to that a lot. They come in and everything they do, they're like, great job, and they become their own cheerleader. And I'm looking like, apparently somebody's been praising you for every little thing that you do. And you want to back down on that and use it when it's most effective to continue the behavior that you're looking for. Also, we want to look at differential reinforcement. So when they're doing replacement behaviors that you actually have taught them, when they're using those, you want to reinforce that by praising them as well, being specific with your praise. And some of these are antecedent where you're redirecting them. If you see that the child is getting frustrated, if you can anticipate that things are ready to go downhill quickly, you may want to pull back and then redirect them with a verbal cue as to what it is you'd like them to be doing. Prompting as well. You want to be cautious with the use of your prompting because children oftentimes become prompt dependent. If they're capable of walking in the room and sitting down, you don't need to tell them, all right, we're walking in the room. Okay, now it's time to sit down. Okay, pick up this item. Okay, now it's time to do this. You don't need to give them all those prompts. You want to fall back and prompt them when it's most needed. Maybe in the initial phases, you may need to prompt more frequently, but you want to use least to more prompting. So you're not always chatting and chatting and chatting. And some of those kids who are more echolalic and on the spectrum, if you fall back, they'll start scripting everything you've ever said in your excessive prompting. So sometimes I hear kids like, is that what I really sound like to you? So you want to be cautious of your prompting and the level and frequency that you're giving them. Is it really needed in that moment? Or are you just used to talking? And we're so used to prompting a child and giving them explicit instructions and everything to do that we need to be cognizant of that and fall back. We touched on planned ignoring, where they're exhibiting a behavior, you don't always want to call attention to it and say, don't this, don't throw the block, don't get out your seat, don't run. Instead, you want to reinforce them with positive reinforcement. I like the way you're walking to the elevator today. So rather than always catching the negative and emphasizing the negative, you want to catch them being good. And one thing about extinction to note is that behaviors will get worse before they get better. And once you think you've got that behavior on the wrap and you haven't seen it in a while, they might get sick, they might be out of sessions for a while, and they come back. It's very critical that you're consistent with your visual supports, because keeping them there and routinely using them, when they've been away for a while and come back and those behaviors are going to kick back up again, you have those visuals there and they're still remembering what they're used for. So behaviors may get worse before they get better, and things that you've thought resolve come back. In puberty, a lot of the things that you've seen early on in a child may come back and worse than before. So just know that all the visual supports and strategies that we're talking about, you need to consistently use them. And some people may think, oh, he doesn't need them. But with new situations, new people, transitions, they are coming back from being sick, something like that, and other life events and trauma that may take place in a child's life, you don't know what's going on before they get there to you. So being consistent with these strategies is going to be key for you. Next one is anytime, any place. The key takeaway here is that you want to know that you can use these strategies anywhere, at any time, and respect that neutral time is a teachable moment all the time. So neutral time is that time when you're going to the lobby and you're picking up the child and they're walking with you. Those are teachable moments. That's when you can be reviewing the schedule. That's when you can be observing that child. You can see, are they off today? You can be communicating with the caregivers. How's his day going? How is school? How is the ride in? Oftentimes, if the child's coming for an 8 o'clock appointment, they might have been up from 6:30, or they might not have even slept that night. So knowing those antecedent factors before you start is going to be key. Even as you're transitioning to terminate the session and you're walking back with the caregivers, that's time to be modeling for the parent what it is that should be expected. Modeling some of those strategies that you've been using in the context of your session to help that family further transition from your office back to wherever it is that they may be going. So if they come in looking like Tad, all in disarray, you should know that that is not a moment for you to sit there and try to intervene. You've got to be anticipatory, know what's happened ahead of time, anticipate what their previous triggers have been. and use the calm before the storm and after the storm as teachable moments to actually model these behaviors, review these approaches with them, bring out the schedule and allow them choices. If they're having a rough time and you get to the elevator, don't automatically press the button, which we're accustomed to. Invite them to participate. Invite them to have some role in what's going on, because choices is embedded in here as well. It can help bring down the behaviors so that the child is able to function. Yes?
What is the cleanup time is always the trigger.
If what?
The cleanup time. When you finish an activity and they need to clean up.
Clean
and they
up?
don't want to, and that's the thing that triggers the.
That's when you need to be given warnings ahead of time. You need to give that child maybe a 2-minute warning. You might want to start modeling halfway through. I'm all done with such and such. I'm going to clean it up and put it in the box so next time we can play with it.
And you want your token board, you want them to be earning whatever it is they want.
Yes. So having your token board out, they're working towards whatever reinforcement
Clean
they
up.
selected.
They don't get that stamp until they clean up.
Mhm. So oftentimes you might not leave cleanup as the last task. You might need to clean up first and then allow them some time at the end. So that's that anticipation. If you know cleanup is horrible for you and you're back to back that day, you're not going to wait till 5 minutes to the end of your session to be like, all right, I got to clean up, I got to review whatever we did in session with the caregiver and get out the door. You might want to start that process 10 minutes early. So your expectations, which you're going to get into the next slide, is key. So less is more. You may be expecting to do 10 activities in the context of that 30-minute or 60-minute session. That might not be what that child can handle on that given day. So you're going to need to alter your personal expectations. Yes, I know today I need to get through all of these things. It might not happen, and you need to be okay with that. You need to prioritize. If in this session I got through one thing, what would it be to count it as a success? Sometimes it's just today we actually sat at the table. Today we actually walked in the room nicely. Today we actually made it through one activity. The rest of the time you might want to shift to more pleasurable things outside of the context of the routine that you've already set up. Because in school we're often taught, okay, you've got to have your treatment plan, what goals are you going to target today, which activities you're going to use to do that. You might have selected a great list of things to do, and that child gets there, and today is just not that day. So communicating with that family and knowing those antecedents that happened before you got there, being aware of the behaviors that that child is currently exhibiting, and the consequences, meaning how you're behaving in relation to that behavior, is going to be key. So if you see that he's not in a just right state, has he eaten today? Is he sick? Is he recovering from a cold? As she's pointed out, biology, you're not going to be able to combat. Physiologically, how is he doing today? Is he tired? Did he sleep last night? A lot of our kids do have sleep issues. Yes?
I have a question about behavior. I have a client who's severely autistic, and he tends to get aggressive during behaviors. He's a 10-year-old boy, so he's pretty
Mhm.
young. What do you suggest as far as like when he actually does try to get aggressive with punishment?
Okay, thank you for your question. We're going to save some of those towards the end. And when we do provide you feedback, it won't necessarily be client specific. It will be addressing that behavior. Okay? We'll get to those
You have to
shortly.
go back to that pyramid. There's lots of things going on here. In the context of a couple minutes, it's very hard to have the big picture.
Yes, because that pyramid, we can't just start at the top with the strategies. We have to consider that foundation. Is that foundation there that helps support those strategies in being effective? We briefly touched on time delay, so you're delaying that reinforcement with the child. As what's very key on this slide again is changing your expectations, considering that client, how are they regulated in the context of that session? How can you facilitate that by using some of those strategies? Can they exercise self-management? And where's that parent? Are we modeling for the parent what it is that we want to be doing? Because less is more. You want to be fading out of that process. You want your behavior not to be impacting that behavior to promote those negative interactions. You want to be supportive. Supportive of that family, supportive of that child to self-regulate, supportive of that child to be successful in whatever it is that you're asking of them in that moment. Alrighty, so we're returning back to Billy, and Dr. Dowling's going to bring you back to that.
Remember Billy, the 8-year-old, the one who's lying on the floor yelling no, spitting and hissing? Okay, he's not 10 yet, but by 10, without intervention, can you imagine what he'll be like at 10? Okay, so I want everyone to take 1 minute. I want you to jot down one thing that you would do with Billy. Okay. The next couple of slides that we're going to be going over are the answers to this, and it's not in your handout, so don't bother looking there. The goal here is to get you to think about some of these things. We throw them out, they sound really good, but bringing it back, and there'll be other cases later on today, but let's stick with Billy. So Billy's 8 years old, he's lying on the floor, saying no. Okay. And I told you in the beginning, what I did say was whether he was given a schedule that was predictable or choices of activities. There were certain things that I omitted, I did not say there, so that should also provide you some hints. Right. 20 seconds. Everyone should have their ideas written down.
Yes.
Is there a task that he's supposed to be performing?
You can hypothesize whatever it is you'd like for him.
All right, so time's up. All right, so let's see. Okay. All right. Okay. Solutions. Okay. If then with a highly preferred activity. Let's say Billy loves to go to McDonald's. So the first part would say I would have a picture of his therapist or whatever I'm expecting him to do. Now, this means, of course, that Billy cannot have been to McDonald's in the last week. So if you were there yesterday, you may not have the same power today. Okay? So you need to have a preferred reward. I always use choices. I generally give children choices of the reward that I'm using, or I wouldn't unless I know them well enough. We also would suggest a visual, personal schedule. When I said introduced it, I said he had a schedule with predictable activities, but I did not say a visual schedule. I did not say personalized, and I did not say manipulative. This is where, in fact, I like the low tech better than the high tech, because the kids actually get to touch it and do it. There's something about moving the parts and putting the stamp on the paper that in of itself is motivating.
And one of the ones we have over here, for that child who loses things or rips things away and might rearrange the order of activities for you, this one, when you make it, you just fold it over and then cut it, and then you Velcro it down. So all they have to do is lift it up or tuck it away, depending on how you want to teach that. I ideally like to tuck it away to show that that task is actually finished. For that child who it's too much to see everything coming up and they might have that anxiety, you may do it the reverse, where you have only a blank there where everything's folded down, and you lift them up one by one as that activity is actually taking place. So you need to tailor it towards that child in particular and consider their needs and how they've responded routinely to your initial introduction to other ones.
And another one is to carefully arrange the space. You saw in that picture that there was a nice comfy chair for Billy to throw himself down on. What if it's a very cold floor, hard floor? Now, I wouldn't necessarily say this for a 2-year-old, but this Billy is 8 years old, okay? So therefore, throwing himself down on the cold, hard floor, Okay? Now, before I go to the next slide, how many of you had some of these things down? Okay. Anybody want to add something else?
Yes.
I have one kid that his weakness are the M&Ms, color M&Ms. So if I put them, you know, where he can see them, when he does something, he said, you're not getting M&Ms until you do whatever you have to do. And usually it works.
Again, that's a lot of language. Yeah, so I don't know the group. Using M&Ms, okay? M&Ms are highly motivating for many children. I like M&Ms if I'm going to introduce something new, but I don't like to use food over the long term. It is, again, something I'm going to then have to wean the child away from. So while food can be powerful, M&Ms are great, there's a little warning embedded in that. So at times we use whatever works. I'm not going to tell you don't use something. There are times when really I'll use food, believe me. But it's not something you want to...
What can you use instead?
The reason why we don't like to use food is if Johnny came in and he's hungry, or he's already eaten 10, 15 of those M&Ms, now he's full. So your strongest reinforcer, you don't have anything left. So it's important to interview the caregiver to find out what it is that that child actually likes. And if you don't have it available to you, see if they can bring something in from home as a last resort, but something tangible. Something that you can put away and be in control of giving to them that they can actually use and gain some enjoyment from.
A tablet?
That's a highly reinforcing one. In this day and age, kids want phones, they want tablets. So it goes back to that child's play experiences. And sometimes we do have families who say, that's all he likes to do. He only likes to use the tablet. And you may find a 2-minute video, play the video and pause it. If you continue to work, we'll play some more of it. But you need to have that tablet far away where that child can't access it, and make sure it's not that child that's going to get into that physical all-out battle with you to actually obtain it.
Right, this is where in fact your behavior can be what we call a discriminating stimulus that basically triggers the challenging behavior. So remember back to those beginning slides when we talked about what happens immediately before and immediately after. And when you're using reinforcement, be very careful that you know exactly what you are reinforcing, because there is a good likelihood that you are reinforcing the wrong behavior. Okay, anybody else want to ask? There's more solutions we'll come to. Carefully arranging space, we talked about that one. Okay, anyone else volunteer? Ideas? Sure.
Vacuum, ignore first, and then start doing another. I will start playing with another game or another toy to get his attention.
Yes, that's true. You could distract him with another thing. What I like to do, which will bring us, I think, to the next slide, which is what you were hinting at, is the inviting toy or activity, okay? What I like to do is I have it in their room, but I will give the child one part or one piece. So for example, if I know a child likes to build train tracks, he will earn a piece of train track, okay? Or I will give him one piece that will get him into the room.
When he's gone down.
No. Remember, Billy wouldn't go anywhere. We're talking about Billy here.
Yeah.
Billy wouldn't go anywhere. As soon as he was going to therapy, go to school, he's throwing himself on the floor. No, he doesn't want to do anything. But the idea is we're using enticement here, okay? Anticipation. The sense as this becomes the motivating thing.
Before they went down.
Right. So we want him to actually, I can't even get him into the room, you know. But I often use, they have different names for this, transitional objects, there's lots of things, but the idea is you can actually use something tangible to get becomes the motivator to get them in, and you're giving him only a piece of it, not all of it. A card to request a break, okay? So the card could be that Billy gets 1 minute, 2 minutes to do whatever he wants, and then that's it. So we're giving him, again, some option, using his interest, using the timer. So in other words, the idea is that these are things that are viable solutions.
Yes.
I think you're using this to prevent the big situation, right? Because
Well-
you use this, maybe you could prevent that breakdown in crying and throwing.
Can you repeat what you said?
Right. She's saying that we would be using these to prevent, possibly, but what we're doing is minimizing. So in other words, the goal here, as we said before, what you want to do is you want to reduce the probability or the frequency of these outbursts or the severity. He may still be whining, but if he's whining, the whining is down to manageable proportions and he's going into the room, I will ignore that whining and reinforce the fact that he's walking so nicely. So I will always find something else to pay attention to because I want to be very clear what I'm reinforcing. So an object may be just a distraction. I don't want it to be such a great distraction that we then get hung up on that. Let's see again. Okay. Did anybody have anything else they want to add? Ideas for Billy? Okay, well, we will come back to the summary here. Tips and tricks, Halloween trick or treat. These are things to take with you. We're putting them in your basket of tools, okay? Remember Goldilocks. Everything has to be just right, okay? So Goldilocks is again our antecedents. These are our setting events. Choices, choices, choices. The more choices that you can give a child, the better. In Billy's case, I would really maximize the choices. Billy, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Do you want to do this? He's so busy processing the choices that he doesn't have the time to sit there and start whining.
And one thing to point out is to let the caregivers know that you're not bribing a child. Oftentimes they'll feel like you're negotiating with the child, you're bribing the child, but that's not what this is. This is giving them a choice in the matter to promote their compliance, participation, and ideal performance in a task. It's not bribing.
Sooner rather than later, do not delay introducing AAC tools and strategies. Always much sooner than later. Catch them being good, okay? You've got to find something to reinforce. Make sure it's the right behavior, anytime, any place. The therapy, in Billy's case, is going to start wherever he is at the moment. I start in the lobby. I start from the moment I approach that family. That's the first, that we start then. It's not when I get to the room. Less is more. I often start off with this huge list. I always have in my head this long list of things that I want to accomplish. But I know that this is a list of possibilities. These are things that I constantly revise. And I do more or I do less, depending on what is going that day. Okay? Sometimes less is more. You get more accomplished by doing less. Okay? And it's all about you. Again, this goes back to your choices, the things that you choose to do, the things that you try. We've given you lots of new things to try here today. Hopefully you will go home and try some of these. If you need help, you know where we are. You can come into the lab and see some of these things.
So ideally, we want to emphasize that it's all about you. It's all about your skills, your knowledge, and your behavior. So now we're going to open it up to questions and comments.
You mentioned that speed trial design.
Say that again.
Okay. The discrete
Oh, discrete trial.
Discrete trial,
Okay.
that wasn't my research. Okay, that was they used rigorous methodologies to evaluate discrete trial learning, okay? And there is no evidence it's not for changing behavior. It's a teaching strategy for teaching skills. So if I want to teach him something, okay, but it doesn't change behavior in of itself.
And it's not speaking to behavior in the general term that behaviorists use it. It's more so speaking to skill acquisition. So you may use, as you said, discrete trial training to increase a child's skills and knowledge in rote concepts, but it doesn't translate out to Johnny learning how to sit appropriately, Johnny learning how to transition appropriately, Johnny learning how to ideally engage optimally in different settings and situations. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So when you do timers, like you said, it's an opportunity to minimize behavior. However, if while using a timer, the child undergoes behavior, starts a tantrum, are you pausing the timer and keeping the timer for the activity, or are you allowing the timer to run while the child has a tantrum?
It depends what you set the timer for.
Okay.
So if you set the timer for the duration of an activity, you may need to pause it.
Okay.
But if it's for a reinforcer, once those 2 minutes are gone, those 2 minutes are gone. You had 2 minutes to complete and engage in your reinforcer, and that's that.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Uh-huh.
You mentioned the use of an iPad or the use of phone. You know, I see a lot of parents who got their kids kind of calming down, quieting down, but it has been shown, of course, that it's not exactly the best way to use as a reinforcer. I know maybe that.
The question is about using the iPad to calm down children. Okay, the iPad is a high-value reinforcement. When you give a child an iPad because they just went and kicked someone, what's going to happen?
If I kick, I get the iPad.
Yes, that's why when I was talking about those in the ABA, those building blocks, it is so important that you make sure you know exactly what you're reinforcing. And if you remember when I went back, those positive behavior supports, those 4 things, you want to be sure that you are careful in identifying and defining the behaviors that you are working with. And that includes the behavior that you're trying to reinforce, what you're doing to prevent it. Now, the iPad might have been used as a way of preventing the behavior. So therefore, you could have used the iPad before the behavior occurred. But once the behavior occurs, giving the child the iPad, I would say no. I would give them some choice. Bottom line, child misbehaves, you give them an iPad. Chances are that they will misbehave to get that iPad. That's the problem with using iPad. And the child is used to using the iPad to watch videos. They now come into my office, there are no videos. There's no internet access on my iPad. Guess what? They get very frustrated when I bring out the iPad. It doesn't do what they want to do. I've now created a new problem.
And then that also goes to using those highly desired reinforcers too frequently. So if you go to that highly desired as your go-to all the time, you have nothing once that child satiates on that, or if it breaks. So ideally we want to start tailoring that towards social reinforcement so it's not always something tangible.
Those
Yes.
are the reason for those token boards. Low value reinforcement, step by working towards something bigger.
Do you have any tips for preventing the break cards and the calm down choice words as becoming an escape for
Okay, the question is avoiding using the
avoiding the child using the break cards and the calm down choice words as an escape from.
So the question is, do we have recommendations for not allowing the choice cards and the break cards to become escape behaviors? So it goes back to you knowing the antecedents and the behavior of the child. So if you're finding that to be a pattern that he's always requesting a break, always requesting a break. I have a little guy I worked with the other day. He's working on toilet training. Now his latest thing is, I need to use a toilet. So I had to check back with the dad. Is this occurring frequently now at home where he's always requesting the bathroom to go and do something? Yes. That's his new replacement behavior. He's requesting a break for something that I really don't know whether he's going to wet my floor or did he really need to go. So it's checking back and observing that child and learning how you can press a little further to get more out of that. That's when I'm like, okay, we need to do it for X amount of more minutes, then you can get a break. So you can shape how they're requesting that break by embedding time on that. So that's that time delayed. You requested it, you're going to get it, but I need you to wait a little longer. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question. So in a group setting where, in the classroom we have maybe one or two children that have, may need these, I don't mean to say need it more than the other ones, but we have ones that typically follow the directions and, and maybe one or two that need extra support. Would you suggest making these tools for everyone?
Okay, so the question was when you have children where there's a group and only a few you're ideally using, well, they may require visuals and all of these supports, would we recommend using them across all of the other children? Ideally, yes, because those children can be used as models. They can help model the desired behaviors with those appropriate supports for those other children. And also when you use it universally, it helps allay that, oh, why does he get to do this? Why does he get to do that? So if everybody's using it, it promotes that consistency. It allows you to model it for the other staff who are actually using it with that child. And it keeps it in the forefront of your day, so it's being used routinely. Any other questions? Yes.
All of them are still work. It's the same Goldilocks.
The question was for working with kids with hearing
Back up.
impairments, how would you use these strategies and which ones would we recommend for a child who has hearing impairments and you have difficulties communicating with them?
All of them still. If you think about it, Goldilocks is really talking about the antecedent events, arranging your environment. Choices, choices, choices was really, you still want to give these choices. And embedded in that are all your visual supports. So we're still talking visuals sooner rather than later, and that's for sure with children with hearing impairment. Sooner rather than later, you better be using AAC. Now I know that's rather controversial to use visual supports for those kids, but I'm going to tell you, I have not seen any evidence that using visual supports interferes with language development. In fact, it is the exact opposite. So regardless of what the philosophy may be, I'm going to go by the evidence, and that's sooner rather than later. So for me, I would probably hit sooner rather than later as my biggest one for these kids.
I agree with you. I think, I know it's controversial. I have found in my experience that, especially if family is trying to do a verbal approach, and that's what they're practicing, to introduce it verbally and then show the visual piece of it, and then reintroduce it again verbally. It's almost like a sandwich. If that makes sense.
And that's why AAC can be used as an in the meantime. Yes, this child may be verbal. Yes, they're going to develop communication strategies depending on whichever ones you're teaching them. But what are we supposed to do in the moment when they don't have those skills yet? But you need to be cautious of how you implement it and know that it's an adjunct to communication and not a substitution for whatever means you're ideally looking to get towards.
Does that help? Sort of?
Yes.
Yes, I have a question. I noticed that speech therapists a lot of times want their child to sit at a table and work with them. However, I have a child who's just too big and older, and it's gotten too difficult for me to sit him at a table regardless of visual cues, coping economies, choices, reinforcers. So would you just suggest simply changing the environment
Definitely, because communication doesn't only take place at a table. And that's what I tell everybody. Communication takes place across multiple contexts, multiple settings. So if you only teach them that we're doing this at this table, that's what they're accustomed to. So when we're looking at generalization of skills, if he's not learned to do this outside of the context of the table, eventually it becomes boring. So yes.
Unfortunately, we are being told with a visual cue that it is time to stop.
So we're going to take a break.